when we talk about strategy, there we are. So again, welcome everybody. Okay. And we are going to talk about strategies and tips to deal with diversity, inclusion, global citizenship, comprehensive sexuality education, perhaps discovering that all these things go all together. They work hand in hand. And it's our duty as teachers to try to change our paradigm, at least to accompany our students as they walk through the school doors and to prepare them for the real world. So when we talk about strategies, the first thing that comes to our mind is usually the skills, okay? Because when we think about strategies, we think about giving them skills, teaching them skills. And when we think about skills in English, it's very often reading, speaking, listening, writing. But nowadays, we have to teach many more things. And we see this in all the books we use. We speak about and we see on the page critical thinking skills, celebrating. These are all the C's of education, okay? Critical thinking, celebration of instead of mere correction. It doesn't mean that we don't have to correct, but it means that also together with, it's not one instead of the other, but it's together with correction, which is okay, especially in our very foreign language environment. We also need to celebrate, because now after the pandemic, social and emotional learning play a very important role, very important. Collaboration and many others. And all these new skills or skills that belong to this new paradigm, of course, we'll start developing them, we'll start working on them at school. Ideally, something, a little bit should come from home. Very often it doesn't. So we start working on this in the classroom, but why? The idea is to provide students with enough and good quality tools that will allow them to go on working on this outside the classroom. This is why all these new paradigm skills, the C's, have become very, very important, because we have discovered that these are the real tools they will need to exist and more than survive, to play an important role outside the classroom. But it's never one or the other, it's together with, it's always a plus there, okay? And it's now and in the future. We have to think about the future. What are we teaching them? And in what way are we teaching them? What are we leaving? What tools do we teach apart from English? Because all these skills, all these sub-skills don't actually grow on trees. We have to teach them, brush them up. And if we work with the family, better. If we can work in a network, better. If we can't, we should at least start doing something locally, small, as English people say. And this has become so important that even UNESCO have set 4 pillars in connection with education, not just the teaching of English, it's education, and it's education all over the world. The world is walking towards this. So we can't remain outside. We have to start changing a few things. So they say that for a student to be able to open the school doors and walk into the real world, they need to learn much more than contents, much more than English, physics, chemistry, and all that. They have to learn to know the world, to know people, to know. They have to learn to live together. And here we have all the social aspects. They have to learn to do, to be proactive. And this is something we teachers complain about when they say, I have no ideas, I don't know how to do it, I think I can't. We have to teach them. And they have to learn to be global citizens, which is not a small thing. I mean, becoming and being able to play an active role as a global citizen, wow, it's difficult and important. So when we think about learning to know, it's like learning to learn. You have to analyze how you learn. And when I say you, I mean you and your students. You have to analyze your work as a teacher. What do you like? What don't you like? What do you find easier? What do you think is very difficult? Because then that is what you have to brush up. So as to be able to transmit all that. And we have to make students aware, not just as a teacher of English, but as an educator. We have to teach them to reflect on their own learning. And this is something that needs brushing up, because we are taught to teach, we are trained to teach everybody in the same way. Books, I mean, the book is for everybody, and we take it for granted that everybody's going to learn in the same way, and actually they don't. So we have to help our students discover, reflect on how they learn so that they can improve their own strategies. That is what we are going to leave them with, more than the third column, more than the passive voice. Learning to live together seems to be very difficult nowadays. It implies empathy, it implies understanding people, accepting other people's mistakes, tolerating. And tolerance has to do with inclusion and diversity. Learning to do has to do with being active, and being active has to do with collaboration, with participation. And in this world, it has to do with using technology, being technologically literate, okay, digital literacy. That is something that we also have to learn if we are not very digital, or to try and include in our classrooms with the technology we have available. Not always do we find the latest technology, but with what we have to look for ways. And learning to be, which has to do with self-regulation, self-assessment, self-esteem, developing autonomy, learning. And here we also have an issue, I think, in Argentina, learning that whatever we do, decision-making is also this, whatever we do has consequences. Because we are all the time making decisions, but whatever we decide is going to have a consequence, and that consequence depends on our choice. So we have to make responsible decisions. And you now must be thinking, but I have 3 hours of English a week or 4 hours of English a week. It doesn't mean that we can do all this all the time, but you can point things out. We try to put things into books, and very often those things are not the main objectives of the lesson, but we will see examples of things that we can all do. And if we all do this, for example, in your institutions, if one teacher does it, probably that teacher is not going to have a lot of good results. Now, if 3 or 4 teachers work along the same line, they are going to notice a difference. So all this plus English, because we have to go on teaching, because our students sit for exams, okay? So nowadays, we don't speak about linguistic skills, we speak about global skills. Okay, very often these skills are considered soft skills because they are more social skills. But when we talk about global skills, we think about these 4 categories: thinking, learning, working, and the social aspect. It's these 4 skills, these 4 concepts that when we develop them in our students, these will guarantee progress in the future. And this is important, because if we teach them good English, and we teach them English well, and we also teach them to think, to reflect on their learning, we provide them with strategies to work in a group, to become leaders, to collaborate, then they are going to become more successful, and they will be able to use the English they have learned in different situations. These 4 concepts of very broad skills are associated with sub-skills, like, for example, thinking has to do with processing, reasoning, imagining things, making decisions, planning, and what in the previous slide seemed to be so far away from our lessons, 4 hours a week, 3 hours a week, well, now we do teach these things, or we should teach these things. Processing information, that is learning. Listening comprehension implies processing information. Reading comprehension implies processing information. Reasoning, when we work with inference and they say, I pero no dice, that is reasoning and it is thinking. Now, we should not wait until they get to B2 to start working on inference because they are going to sit for an exam. I mean, inference starts from the very beginning. Primary courses. Imagining, even if they don't have the language, even if they don't have the second conditional, it doesn't matter. Take the opportunity, take the chance to make them imagine things. And it doesn't matter if they need to make a sentence in Spanish. When you put things, when you consider which is more important, I would say developing imagination is much more important than 2 sentences in Spanish, okay? So making decisions, planning, teaching them to write, teaching them to make decisions, teaching them to choose what they prefer so that not everybody writes about the same thing, so that not little children, when you ask them, what is your favorite part in the story? So that everybody draws or writes about a different part. All this is thinking, and actually we do it or we should do it. Learning, making them aware of how they learn. We work very much on reading comprehension, but actually the modern world requires much more than just reading comprehension, or at least much more than the traditional reading comprehension that we teachers of English find in most books. Because when they go to university, the reading comprehension is much more technical and more hand in hand with grammar, which is something that we tend to avoid. Numeracy, and you may say, well, we are teachers of English. Well, if you pay attention to most books, usually they teach, or we teach, numbers in the first grades, and then we forget about numbers. And when they get to the upper courses and they have a listening comprehension, in all international exams, they've got listening activities that include numbers, and they don't remember 1,000, 100, million, billion, what's that? How many zeros, how many, a comma or a dot? And well, all that, I mean, when you do it regularly, that is everyday world, because then it also happens that when they go to England, they cannot read prices. Or when somebody tells them the price of a jacket, they just don't know if it's 1,000 or 100. So all this is important. And information, communication technology, that is computers, digital literacy, it's here to stay. I am old. So teachers may be older, younger, more experienced, less experienced in connection with technology, but we must ask our children, our students, what they like, what they know, what they can do, and you will find a very interesting variety. Different children, different students like doing different things, have got different apps, are used to working in different ways with technology. Let's take advantage of that independently of what the book has or doesn't have. Most books have projects. Allow them, give them the possibility to choose how they want to present that. When you do a reading comprehension, ask them to summarize in different ways. How? Maybe somebody's going to make a simple chart, but maybe somebody's going to surprise you with a short video, with something interesting. Allow for all this, because it does have an impact. An impact where? Here, on their memory. And it's very, very important. All this is learning to learn so that they discover new things. We have a problem, Houston, in this respect, because our students, and for different reasons, maybe Bahía Blanca is different, correct me if I'm mistaken, but I have the feeling that because of the pandemic and even before the pandemic, students lost contact with regular homework. They lost contact with studying regularly. And we teachers in a way, or some teachers in a way, are a bit responsible, because during the pandemic, we took time to try and discover ways of getting in touch with them, ways of making them work, ways of correcting their work. And so this allowed for some flexibility And now this flexibility is in our classrooms. So they never hand in work on time. They never hand it in properly. So we have to work on this. These are sub-skills. And again, they don't grow on trees. We have to, these should be our, what I call subsidiary aims. If my name is making my students understand and use passive voice, for example, well, then one part of that should be this, or one of these. And if you include these as sub-skills in your lessons and subsidiary or secondary aims in your lessons, but regularly, the key here is the word regularly. If you do it once, it doesn't work. Or at least if you become aware that you need more collaborative work in your lessons, or that Pedrito is not handing in work, he's not arriving on time, well, let's insist on this, but all the team together make a point of this. If I allow Pedrito to come in late, but Mary doesn't, well, then that doesn't work institutionally. And in terms of social aspects of social skills, we talk about empathy and understanding others. We also talk about well-being, and it's important. In another seminar, I always mention the fact that when I started to become a teacher, I used to write in my plans, how are you today? I'm fine, thanks. There was no other possibility. That was a fixed expression, and the question had to go with that answer. Nothing else could appear. Well, in fact, this is not so anymore. We have to teach adjectives, we have to teach feelings, we have to give them the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm sad today, I'm not feeling well, I've got a tummy ache, I've got a problem at home. Social also implies, and here we have the notion of comprehensive sexuality education, which has got sex and sexuality education there, but that is a concept that we as teachers of English don't need to go into. But it's got other things that are very important and that we need to address, like stereotypes. When we talk about clothes, stereotypes, when we talk about families, it doesn't mean we have to talk about special families, but it means that we perhaps don't need or maybe shouldn't show the perfect family only. Because doing that, we would be hurting a child whose family is not that ideal thing. And that child who maybe can't speak, can't tell everybody, you know what, I've got two mothers, or you know what, my mom is alone, or you know what, I've got no mom, I'm with my granny. And how often do we find this? So all that is comprehensive sexuality education. It is well-being. It is asking a child, how are you feeling? All this is comprehensive sexuality education, and there the world is going. So we have to go together with the world. In a way, that has to do with cultural awareness, because we cannot speak about inclusion and diversity if we don't open our minds. We cannot speak about diversity and inclusion if we open a book and all the children we see there are perfect, with beautiful blue eyes and blonde hair, and that doesn't reflect our reality. So half of our children will feel they don't belong. All this is there to challenge us. And in the middle, communication, opening our eyes, making them feel involved, engaged through English. So why are these skills important? Well, first, it seems to be obvious, but there are some reasons that I think go beyond what we think, what we tend to think. They are essential if we want the children to do well at school, because a child who gets perfect marks, a child who succeeds, a child who seems to be perfect, maybe he's suffering. So there is when you suffer or when you are not feeling well and when you are worried or bullied, there is one part that you are not learning, even when you get a 10. So all these skills are essential to do well at school, but also to give you tools for later on. It's not just the school, it's beyond the school. And as The culturas are very important institutions, and as such, you play a very important role in this development of new global citizens, in the development of a new paradigm. And so the child needs to learn how he or she learns better, or he can learn better, so that later on, maybe it's now, maybe it's tomorrow, how many students do we find who are not very good in my classes or in your classes, and then you discover that they do succeed after 1 or 2 very bad years? Why? Because somehow they learn to make the most of their experiences, to transfer knowledge. And they learn later, but they do learn. To relate to the different others, English is a very good tool for communication, especially if you think about others in a broad sense of the word, because others may be the one who is sitting next to me, but others nowadays may be a Chinese person there behind my screen, and I'm working with him or for him. So that implies learning about culture, that implies not discriminating, that implies being open. But for this, we have to teach them to do that. To go on learning, telling them that the world is changing. I always say that we all learn every day, and graduating is just the beginning. It's never the ending, it's the beginning. From there, we start learning, because each experience is going to leave a mark. And then maybe one day or the day after, we discover that we want to go on studying this or that, or we read an article that sounds interesting and we investigate. Go on learning. The world is walking in that direction. It's a non-stop thing. And of course, we have to understand global issues to take action. We cannot take action, we cannot have a position if we don't understand global issues. And for this, we need compromise. And that compromise implies that I cannot change the world. But today, for example, if I leave just one tip that you find useful, then I will be changing a little bit, because then you multiply this. You've got 30 students or more, or you tell a colleague, start small, but start. The same with environment, or with global issues, peace, tolerance. All these concepts, global citizenship, diversity, equity, inclusion, equity, it doesn't mean that we are all equal, because actually we are not equal. But we should all have, considering our differences, the same rights. If I have a child who is dyslexic, and I give him or her the same test as all the others, to be done in the same amount of time, well, I'm not respecting equity, because I know this child will fail. So all this is related, and it's very important that we become aware of this. So if we go for this, and the world is going towards this, it has some consequences. It implies certain things. And I think that we say a lot, but we are doing very little. So we have to bridge that gap, and we have to know what this implies. And it implies raising awareness. As educators, our word is heard. And more than heard, very often listened to. So we have to make everybody aware of special conditions. We have children and adults with special conditions, and they have special needs. They can get to the same point, but they will get there in a different way. It means that whether we like it or not, I mean, the world is going in that direction. If I don't belong, then I will be left out. So we have to work within a social and emotional framework, asking people how they feel. What can I do for you? Being open in terms of time and attitude to listen to them. We are people. Today, I attended a meeting where a Brazilian consultant said, we listen to the teacher persona. We have to listen to the teacher persona and to the student persona and to the parent persona, discovering how they feel, what they need. And of course, raising awareness as much as, because we've got 3 or 4 hours, but within this time framework and limitation, raise awareness of social issues. Let's talk about what is happening elsewhere. That will allow me, a simple picture will allow me to talk about a different reality. When I have a text in an article, finding out about what happens in a different reality, in Bahia, in Argentina, or in different countries, and all that together with the language. Now, we spoke about special conditions, and when I say special conditions, I ask teachers, what are the most common conditions that you find in your classes? And usually they tell me these: autism, Down syndrome. We may have 1 or 2 in each school, but usually you don't have 2 per class. I mean, usually it's not that, but we have a lot of ADD, ADHD. We are getting more Asperger students, okay, and a lot of dyslexia. Now, why is it important? 1, to learn about these things, and 2, to really cater for these special needs. It's very difficult to cater for all these needs, almost impossible in 3 or 4 hours a week. It depends on the teacher. It depends on how much time he or she has to devote to do all this. Now, why is it important? Because these people with ADD, autism, they are like that forever. So if you consider yourself an educator and a good teacher of English, it means that you want them to learn English. So if you want them to learn English, it implies that you will look for different ways in which you can help them to learn. So first you have to learn about what they need, and then you have to start trying to see what works and what doesn't work. They will not change. They just they are like that. It's a way in which their brain works. It's also important because we know there's a lot of evidence that shows that they may succeed. In fact, very important CEOs are dyslexic, ADD, autistic. So this again gives us a very important question mark in our educational system. Why do we treat them as failures if most of them succeed? Then it's my duty as an educator, because when we learn and when we decide to be teachers, we never decide to be teachers so as to teach the good ones. I never learned to be a teacher in order to have very good linguistic learners, all the others out. I mean, we teach English. So because we are educators, we have to learn and teach these children as well. And then, and most important of all, they've got rights. And in this world, we are speaking about equity. So what worries us about these children, and I say children, but maybe kinder, primary, secondary, and university, what worries us is their poor performance. We feel they cannot cope. They cannot cope because they don't learn the same way as the others, and we are trained to teach in one way. Their performance is weak at reading, writing, understanding. They have got a lot of attention difficulties, very often impulsive. And so that is what worries us, that they cannot behave properly and they cannot learn, apparently. So we could get worried and ask for help and call parents in. And we present this difficulty. We are worried about the performance, not about the child. But these things, these conditions, dyslexia, ADD, autism, autistic spectrum disorder, they are neurodevelopmental. Neuro means the brain. Developmental, development. So there is something in the brain that won't change, won't be cured, but that something will change as the child grows. It doesn't mean it will be cured. They are not, we cannot cure all these things, but they will have ups and downs. They will be compensated and then not compensated, compensated and not compensated. Plus the fact that after the pandemic, we are beginning now to see more and more depression and anxiety. This is not neurodevelopmental, this is psychological, this is emotional. So here we need one treatment, here we need another kind of treatment. Now, does it matter to us, teachers? No. No. I have to teach English to that child I've got there. Because if he's in my classroom, it means that he is not an extreme. It means that he can or she can more or less manage. So if he is autistic, if he is ADD, well, it's good to know so that I can look for strategies, but actually it will not change, or it should not change my attitude, the way I plan, okay? I should always be willing. Now, if I have a diagnosis with some tips from the psychologist, from the psychopedagogue or educational therapist, that would be great. That would be another thing, but very seldom do we get that. Because it's not the diagnosis that matters, actually. It's the key element is, what does he like? What does she like? What can he do? What can't he do? That's all I need to know. With those 4 answers, I can plan and I can get a good result. Now, there are basic things we have to know about these conditions. About dyslexia, you can see there 2 pictures at the bottom left corner, bottom right corner. That is the way they see. When we show them a text, that is the way they see the text. Very often when we ask teachers, what do you know about dyslexia? They say, they cannot read. It's not that they cannot read. They can read. They've got difficulty. They find it very hard to learn to read. And then they take ages to read. And then it's difficult to read because of all this. When we speak about learning to read, we use what we call 2 roots. One is called the lexical root. Some children, for example, when they go in the car, here in Buenos Aires, we've got a supermarket chain that is Coto. Coto is everywhere. And so you're driving and the child, as he's a baby, the mother says, I'm going to Coto, let's go to Coto. So eventually when the child is 3 or 4, he sees the sign and he says, Coto, Coto. It doesn't mean that he can read, but it's a special kind of reading. That is lexical. He learns the image of the word. What we need is not just the image. The image of the word altogether works for words that we use all the time and words that look different, like jeans. We use them in Spanish. It's the same in English. There we can speak about lexical root. But then the most important root and the one that is affected in dyslexic children is the phonological root. These children, when they are very young, they cannot rhyme. They cannot see, for example, that mama or mum is the combination of you repeat 100 times and you tell them and he can repeat but he cannot put mum, the 3 sounds together. If they cannot put the 3 sounds together, the 3 symbols of the letters together, of course, when you write the letters and you say this is M, it's called M, but it sounds impossible. This is why they take ages to learn. Until the teacher discovers that he or she has got a problem, the child is already in 2nd grade. Because at the beginning they say, it's a question of time, it's a question of time. The child is already in 2nd grade, but the problem is not that he cannot read anything. The problem is that he's dyslexic. He needs a special treatment, which is not very long, he needs a specialist to teach them how to read and to work on the connection between graphemes and phonemes. This is why, because of all this difficulty, they tend to read once they learn, usually late, fourth grade more or less. They tend to omit letters, to substitute letters, to write letters in the wrong order. As they grow up, and that is the time when we have them in our schools of English, that's the time when you receive the child, and when your teaching becomes more demanding, because when the child is in second or third grade or primary or children course, as you call them, they need to read. And they need to read and understand. But they need to make such a great effort to read, because they say, is, they make such a great effort, and it takes so long that they cannot focus on meaning. So this requires a lot of attention, a lot of patience, and of course, the child feels in a different way. Of course, he feels inferior, and very often the child is bullied. So everything is linked to everything else. Another interesting issue is that because the brain is affected, very often attention disorders go together with the others. So it's a cluster. It's not just dyslexic, it's a bit more. This is why it's complex, okay? So when we say, he must be ADD, well, who knows? So what matters here very often is not just the attentiveness. What bothers the teacher, unfortunately, is the hyperactivity and the impulsiveness. If the child is only attentive, but doesn't bother, we don't complain. But the child is not learning. So the first thing we need to know, we need to remember, now that you know, is that this is neurodevelopmental. The child doesn't do it on purpose. No es fiaca ni maleducado. His brain works in a different way. This, of course, affects the academic performance. He cannot focus, okay? And as a consequence, because everybody says nasty things about that poor child, of course, emotions and the behavior is affected. So what do? We complain, and the parents ask for something magical to cure him. But there is no cure. It's like paracetamol for the headache, okay? We give them Ritalin, pills or drops, and that is going to have this. It's going to have an effect for just 3 hours, just 3 hours. It has an effect 1 hour after the child has taken it. But the child has no cure. This is only for the symptoms. And like every medicine, it's got side effects. So is it good? Well, I don't know, in some cases. That's the last thing I recommend after seeing different specialists. And we are receiving in our schools more and more autistic children. These are pictures taken by a photographer from The Guardian, the English newspaper, whose child is autistic, but the child is a severe autistic child, a level 3 child, and this is how the child behaves. And so this father wanted to show the world what it is like, so that people begin to understand. We are likely, and we are having a lot, in fact, of level 1 autistic children. Now we call them high functioning autism or Asperger's. These are the Asperger's. Sometimes they are different, but they are so normal also within inverted commas that sometimes we don't realize that they've got this. Sometimes we just say they're a bit weird, or he looks very intelligent, but that's it. They are not sociable. They don't like belonging to a group. They work on their own. They don't like working orally, but they are very intelligent, and they are in general obsessive. So they hand in on time. They are very neat. They can write in pencil and then in ink on top. we are not likely to have a severe autistic child, because these are the ones that start banging their head on the wall, that start shouting without any kind of control, and they may be dangerous, all right? What you need to remember is that this is neurodevelopmental, and as such, it's going to have ups and downs. Now, here is the key. What can we do? Of course, there are strategies for each of these things, but we don't have time. I have to give you something very general. First of all, this is something that is essential for all these cases, what we call the agenda. The agenda may be with photocopies, like maybe we call it foamy rubber or goma eva, something that you can stick things on and remove them easily. And you can stick maybe words, like, for example, lesson or book, just book, or student book, then workbook, then, or the activity, maybe song, crossword, pair work. Maybe a picture, a photocopy, maybe just a word, maybe foamy rubber, or maybe just before starting the lesson, you write 3 or 4 words, keywords for what you are going to do. As you do exercise 1, you invite that child who's got the problem, maybe the child who is autistic or the child who is dyslexic, or as they have done it, that child comes to the board and erases number 1 that said, for example, song. Or in this case, where you have the foamy rubber agenda, you can remove the first picture so that physically, visually, they know there are 2 left. All these children have got organization difficulties, all of them. So this helps them to plan. Their brain needs planning. Of course, you need to be very patient. This requires planning, but this is not expensive. This is not impossible. I mean, if you don't want to buy the foamy rubber, you can just write 4 words on the board, and it takes 1 second, okay? We can all do this, and it's going to help them a lot. So that gradually they look at the board and see what is left. It helps them organize the brain work. Clear instructions, but we all give clear instructions. Now, give the instructions once you have that student in particular, that student's attention. That is, near, looking at him, pointing, whispering, another example perhaps, okay? They need a special place. You need to be near them. You need eye contact. And if you observe, that eye contact is going to tell you when he's about to stop paying attention, when he needs to go out, drink water, and come back. When we talk about tests in particular, or activities, sometimes we give them photocopies. Well, they need a bigger font, and bigger, I mean number 14 on. So forget about cheap photocopies. Forget about, well, I don't want to spend so much, I'm going to put the exercises, or maybe 2 or 3 columns. No, it's only 1 column, big handwriting. The line where they are expected to write has to be there. They need to be able to anticipate what's going to happen. The agenda is one way, okay? And it's visual and it's very clear. They need opportunities. If they are not sociable as the Asperger child, for example, well, you can give them the opportunity to write something, to make a video of something, to record something just for you. You have to look for alternatives, but they need to have the chance to do the same as the others. And they want you to celebrate the very small things they can do rather than correct what they cannot do. Now, for this, of course, you cannot do it alone, or at least it will work much better if you get the family support and if you get institutional support. As teachers, you may take this to the schools, not only to the Cultura. And I'm sure that Culturas, well, they are going to give you all the support they need. This is not always the case when you work in a big school. It doesn't matter. Start small with your colleague, with just 1 teacher, and then maybe 2 teachers or 3 teachers, okay? And of course, this needs special assessment strategies. We have to be logical. If you work in this way throughout the year, it means that child is going to work in this way the day of the test. So what does it mean? Bigger font, bigger font. More aura, more aura. Alone, alone. In a special place because he needs to be quiet. Asperger's cannot stand noises. They get very nervous, very excited, easily excited at exams. Maybe the library is a good place. Think about all this before the assessment. These are things that may help you, objects that may help you deal with all these difficulties. Grips to help children to hold the pencil properly. When a child is dyslexic, he's got a lot of problems. When a child has got attention problems, when he's inattentive, he finds it very hard to focus. If that child is just 6 and is beginning to read and write, with all that difficulty, holding the pencil and moving the hand for the motor skills development, that is going to be really hard. And the result is that they are very untidy, they cannot copy the letters, the handwriting is enormous, going down below the line. Well, this helps a lot. What I call the reading window, it's just a piece of cardboard, any color, with a hole in the middle, so that when you put the reading window on the text, what you see here in the hole is just a phrase, just one part of the text. So the child is not paying attention to all the page, just to those 3 or 4 words. This is very useful to keep them focused. This is very useful for dyslexic children that, remember that I showed you how they see the letters. So, and this is essential when you think about an exam, for example, and you've got one of these cases. Then you've got Lecto App. This was an application created by an Argentinian group. It is free. They can use it for when they read a text. It gives them the opportunity to transform the text into a Word document, and so they can enlarge the font very easily. It's got a picture dictionary incorporated, a dictionary incorporated, a reader incorporated, so that there's a word that they don't know how to pronounce, they can listen to the pronunciation. It's both Spanish and English. Well, with little children playing with physical things to write on. In England, in 1st grade, they teach children to write using a pencil, a biro, chalk, and markers. So the child learns to write on sheets of paper, on the board, on salt or sand, and that develops the motor skills in a different way. And of course, in seconds, they can read and write everything. And it's something that we can do in our culturas or in our institutes. Then remember that we are going back. We cannot use this in books, because in books we need to use colorful pictures. But if you have problems in your classes, we are going back to pictograms. Children with difficulty need simple pictures. So sometimes it's better when you systematize the grammar. Sometimes it's better for an exam, not a nice and colorful or nice and attractive picture, but a simpler one that conveys the meaning clearly. Sorry. Very often, these children, why am I saying this? Because remember, I told you about global citizenship, respecting diversity, walking towards inclusion. You need to know what you can do. And this, we are talking about children with difficulties, but actually this goes for everybody. Sometimes we have not even noticed that a child has got some kind of difficulty, but we know that some strategy works better. Why? Because we are all different, okay? So sometimes we need to make adjustments to the way we present things, because the text is too long. And sometimes it's not just for students with special needs. Sometimes I've got a 4th year that is very slow at reading comprehension, and they have the level, but they take longer. So we need to adjust. And so there I need to segment. Sometimes I need to simplify. Sometimes I need to transform texts from, I don't know, a newspaper article maybe to an interview that they can read faster, okay? Time is also an interesting component. All these children with difficulties, but sometimes children who have a special need of another type, they need more time. And if they need more time, then we need to change the time. Imagine I'm giving them a test, and I know that it's going to be segmented, or I know that they cannot focus for more than 10 minutes. Well, then I will have to make the arrangements, because I will have to divide the test into different papers or into different sections. And for that, I need the place and space arrangement. Where? Who with? They need silence, distractors. Until, I don't know, I would say 5 or 6 years ago, we used to insist on posters in the classroom. The atmosphere has to be positive. Well, now it's the opposite. The whiter, the better, because everything becomes a distractor, okay? And we have to work very carefully and very thoroughly on organization. This is, I think, a national problem, and it's not for just children with difficulties. They are not organized in terms of materials. Where is the workbook? I don't know. Have you take out the reader? Okay, como? No idea. So we need to insist on that. They need to receive like a note or a message or a WhatsApp message, like to remind them, tomorrow is Wednesday, remember to bring the reader. Every Wednesday you have the reader, something like this, okay? We need to teach them to make the most of the time they have. And the only way to do that is to have a physical clock on the wall, on the whiteboard or green board, probably, if possible, a clock that works well, a clock with hands, so that you tell them, look, when this hand comes to this number, your time is up. It's physical. It's the movement. Cuando llegue acá esta aguja, your time is up. So it's physical, and that gives them the idea to grasp the idea of more time, less time. Pair work and group work. Very often, not when you have small groups, but in schools, especially in secondary schools, teachers say, okay, I want this to be done in groups. Good. They all have groups. They are teenagers, except the ones who have difficulty, who usually don't belong. So if I say, come on, get together in groups, I have to make a point of inviting Pedrito to join group A, because if not, Pedrito will be left alone. And that moment, it's just a minute maybe, but Pedrito says, no tengo grupo yo. How will he feel? How would you feel? And that is very easily solved. I say, you, and you, group A, you, and you, group B. And tomorrow we swap. But that is very important. And every book has got pair work and group work. But we are the managers. So then, summing up, it's important to pay a lot of attention to social and emotional learning, because social and emotional learning have become a framework, a way of teaching. So it's not just a page in a book. It implies all this: relationships, responsible decisions, being aware of what happens next to me. And of course, you do have works in the book, pages in a book, and you also have other things, like, for example, this very simple picture, but showing different hairstyles, different skin color, a child in a wheelchair. Now, if I am not aware of this social and emotional framework, I will just do this as a reading. I will listen, I will play the audio, and I will work on the grammar, on the vocabulary. But this is here for a reason. And it is our duty to point these things out, to make them think. There's a child with glasses on. Hay alguno acá que use anteojos, los nenes no quieren usar anteojos, les da vergüenza. And we are trying to use pictures of children wearing glasses to make everybody feel identified. Those very simple things, they don't have a page in the book. They don't have an exercise saying, identify the people. No, the picture is there for the teacher to work on it, to make them think. And then, of course, yes, you have social skills, but they have to be social skills that reflect everyday situations to make them think. If the social skill is very abstract, it's a value, little children don't pay attention. What matters is this: raise your hands. Don't talk all together. When you are queuing at the kiosk or when you're queuing to get on the school bus, don't walk on top of somebody else. Just wait for your turn. Respect teachers. I mean, all these have to be very simple things, but everyday life situations. Otherwise, they have no value. Talking about stereotypes, we can do many things. We can use the pictures in the book. We can use readers. This is in one particular book, but if you don't have this, it doesn't matter. We can make them change a story. What if the main character were a girl? How would the ending change? How would it affect the situation? I don't know, depends on the book you are using. But this is a story of a prince who looks, good looking and strong, but he's got a secret that he cannot tell the people in his kingdom because he likes knitting. He can crochet, but imagine all these people talking about a prince who wants to crochet all the time. That doesn't sound very brave. Until there is a terrible storm and the prince decides to go from house to house, teaching everybody to knit so that everybody gets something warm for the winter. But second thing that is not directly addressed here, not everybody learns at the same time in the same way. So there were people who learned to crochet and there were others who just couldn't. So the king stayed up and knitted and knitted and knitted until everybody had a blanket. So the princess started thinking and said, wow, if my prince can crochet, then I can go and fight the dragons. And so both become empowered in a different way. There is a lot of language here. There is no sex involved, but this is comprehensive sexuality education in terms of reflecting on stereotypes. You see how many things we can do with any story you have. We have already seen that it's important to raise awareness in connection with social and global issues. Every book has got pictures. Every book has got articles about the environment. No book is going to have an article on poverty because it's not motivating. Don't you have poor people in Bahia Blanca? And even if you don't, we should raise awareness. Not everybody has got the same things. So just a picture for description, just a comment, just imagine you make your children aware of other realities, okay? And you've got all the details in this UNESCO document, but the idea is that you can use what we have to trigger other things. And this is the kind of planning we need to do, not just planning the grammar and the vocabulary. The real world, using the material you have in the book. Now CLIL is coming back. Everybody in the world is going back to CLIL. And it is good, I agree. We need a lot of content because they know nothing, I agree. But let's make a connection with the real world. I mean, here, before this page, there was a page about, for example, the watermelon and the process that the watermelon went through from the seed to the real watermelon and the juice. Okay, but then what do I do with that? I want my students to represent, and then remember I told you about decision making and consequences and empathy and communication and collaboration. Each group is going to choose, for example, another seed, not the watermelon, and they are going to represent the text they read visually. And how they choose, maybe some kind of cartulina, maybe just a picture. The one who is better is going to start writing. The one who doesn't like writing is going to just explain the picture. Maybe somebody who is very, I don't know, digital is going to make a good video. And what is important, they can tell others about this cycle. Sharing, talking to others. Now they make the poster any way they like, but then there comes a moment when they have to stand up and share. That standing up and sharing, that is collaboration, that is confidence, that is choice, that is critical thinking, because here they have to choose what they include, what they don't include, how they're going to represent that. So it's this that matters more than the clear page in the book. So opportunities to represent the real world, opportunities to speak real English. The cat is under the table. We have to teach them from the very beginning to speak and understand real English. And this real English now is not the real English I learned or the real English you learned. There is no more RP in England. When you travel, it's difficult to understand what they say because the language is changing in the same way as our language is changing. Yeah. So it has to be real. And we have to teach them real skills. We spoke about organization. We spoke about working together. We have to teach them to organize materials. They Google, well, okay, what, how? How are you going to choose what is meaningful, what is relevant, and what is not according to the task? It's not just write a summary. It's not just investigate and present. It's okay, let's work together. So it's think, investigate, prepare, write, check that you have included linkers, check that you are really doing all the points in the task and not just half. So all this has to be taught, unfortunately. And we have to teach them learning to learn and learning from others and with others, to respect their peers and to learn from their peers. So the moment the students are sharing the work, the others have to listen, and we have to train them to listen and train them to listen for what? Train them to listen and decide if they are using original language, listen to decide if they have made mistakes, listen to decide if the presentation is meaningful and interesting, listening to decide what they have learned from their peers' presentation. And preparing the student for the real world means work or study. That is the real world. And so it means learning to assess one's work. Self-assessment is essential. One's work, it's easy to assess others, but assessing oneself begins at home. I have to assess my work, and I have to teach them, to teach my students to assess their work regularly. In this case, it's a game. It's very easy, but making them think, why do you think you got it wrong? Teaching them, well, this is just an example of values. The value is here, clean up, but the idea is getting the place ready. During the pandemic, we had our lessons with the children in bed, in pajamas, trying to understand whatever, because they were lying, of course, thinking about something else. Well, we have to get all that properly. I mean, we have to go back to the beginning. You need a position, which is not the same. When I go to bed, I'm ready to sleep. When I want to study or work, I have to be sitting up, and I need a place that is ready for that. So when they sit, The desk has to be clean. They're going to take out a pencil if they need a pencil, the colors if they need all the colors, not everything just in case. That is organization. Preparing for the real world means preparing them for what they don't understand. Problem solving. I mean, make an effort to understand what is there. No dice, no, no dice, no. If it's there, it's because you can understand, even when you don't know. So if we all work together in the same way, they will get it. If nobody does it and we all repeat, they don't know, that's not the way. So problem solving and teaching them to make an effort and try, that is the key. Numbers in the real world, as I told you before, I mean, numbers have to be there all the time in connection with prices, in connection with, I don't know, employees, in connection with bacteria, because it's work and study. That is the real life that they're going they're going to face when they leave our institutions, okay? And of course, digital literacy, that is the real world. And it doesn't matter that I, as a teacher, have to be digital or digitally literate. They can be, and I can just listen and discover and learn with them and from them. And of course, all this implies a different kind of assessment. It has to be more meaningful in terms of the texts we use. The texts have to be informative. Mary gets up at 5, Shah no va más. So the texts have to be informative. The activities have to be meaningful. The activities have to be shorter. We have to take into consideration their times. And perhaps not for a final exam, because you are culturas and you cannot evaluate external students in the same way, but your own students, through projects, through school-based assessment, cultura-based assessment. That is much more meaningful. This type of thing, when they create, they decide how they're going to present. They present something visual, a written piece, and also the spoken part. That is much more meaningful than filling the blanks with the correct word, clearly. Perhaps it doesn't mean that one goes instead of the other, but it does mean that more instances of this are going to guarantee better development in general, and then the rest for the final, something like this. But we are going in that direction, unfortunately for us. And of course, well, social life means talking, but it means talking in different ways. Also, digital literacy is here, because performing with the cell phone in your hands is one thing, and acting out is another. Different skills are involved, and we have to include both. But we have to teach them to hold a conversation. They don't know how to start a conversation. They can answer questions, but they don't know how to start or finish a conversation. We have to teach them to feel confident and proud of their work so that they feel well. And feeling proud of your work doesn't go with correction all the time. Balance. It has to do with the practical the practical aspect of the language. We tend to focus on grammar and vocabulary. And when we take students to England, they don't know how to ask, the price, or to say, have you got a bigger size? Or have you got this same jacket, but I want it green, not red? And it's basic things, because the grammar, they have seen it. I have an anecdote, and this was a teacher. When we were in a shop in England, they ask you all the time if you want a receipt, because in this protection of the environment, they don't print the receipt all the time unless you need it. So the lady asked the teacher, do you need a receipt? And can you imagine what the teacher said? I'm okay, I don't want to sit. This is a clear example of a great gap between grammar and vocabulary and the function of the language and the real English that they are using now, which is different from the one we have used or we have learned. So Our students need English as a tool. And so it's much more than grammar and vocabulary. It's everything else, and also the functionality of the language. Those expressions that are not grammar or vocabulary, that kind of thing, excuse me, could you please tell me? Those things that, of course, they are demanding because they don't like acting out. But if we don't do them somehow, they will never get the chance to speak and interact properly. And of course, social life and well-being have to do with reflecting, and there may be other verbs, but at least reflecting, maybe challenging if you want, but at least reflecting on stereotypes. We are having many cases of students who challenge our stereotypes as teachers. I have in a school a child in 4th grade who is a girl. Physically, she's a girl, but she wants to line up with the boys. And now she and her parents have asked the school to allow her to go to the boys' toilet. This is here. It's happening. There are many cases like this. So we can close our eyes and complain, or we can be open to the real world. And personally, you may accept it, you may like it or not, that's personal. But as educators, we have to include everybody, because everybody has got the same right to learn. And so this means reflecting on stereotypes. Myself as a teacher, together with my students. And there are many examples. This is one in Get Involved, for example, where this is an interview to a lady who is a Formula One driver, and it's a woman. I'm not saying it's good, it's bad. I mean, it's something different. The children, the students are going to tell you what they think, and you will discover that they are more open than we are. And it's great. That is great. So why are we talking about all this? Because this seems to be a new paradigm, and it shouldn't be so, because in many places we are still training teachers to teach everybody in the same way, because the method seems to be the only answer, considering that everybody is the same. The only thing that some teachers are beginning to consider is feelings. Okay, so I teach sad instead of I'm fine, thank you. Well, maybe I'm sad today. But it's not only this. We have to consider that we've got different people. It's not only that they have different feelings, they've got different realities. And because they come from different realities, they've got different needs. So the method has to be eclectic and has to be flexible, and has to give a hand, offer a hand to absolutely everybody. And of course, this means clearly commitment. This is why I say my talks never make your life easier. And of course, not everybody's going to agree with me. And of course, not everybody's going to put all this into practice, because it's very demanding, and all for the same amount of money. But it requires commitment. It requires a lot of planning, but not writing. Planning in the sense of this: how am I going to help Pedrito? How am I going to help Susan, who has got some kind of reading trouble? I don't know if she's dyslexic, but she takes time to read. How can I help? And I understand that some students and some teachers are not ready, or maybe we are not willing, and it's honest to say, no, you know, I am about to retire. I don't want to change anything. I'm comfortable as I am. We ought to respect that as well. Not everybody is ready and not everybody is willing. What we should not admit is the fact that very often teachers complain about the students, but this is not the students' responsibility. It's my responsibility. And then if I don't want to do it, I have to say, I'm not ready, I'm not interested, I'm not willing, okay? Clearly, if I work like this and it's just myself and I don't share, nothing is going to change. Networking is necessary with the family and among the teachers in the institution. The more, the better. And of course, the materials may help. If this is not in the book, add it. After this, you can at least pay more attention to the pictures you have in the book. If you do that, that's a starting point. Pictures give you a lot of opportunities. You and your students, a lot of opportunities. As our friend Vygotsky said, we are secondary attachment figures. The first is the mom or the dad or the family. Then we are secondary attachment figures. We represent love, giving, being there for them when they need it. That is what an educator, a teacher represents. Now it's up to us to take it or leave it. But we have a very important key, and that is the key to this. Make it happen. Make your classroom a positive world. Make your classroom like as if it were the transition, the connection between school and the real world. And this implies, yes, a lot of English, because English, they need English to survive in, and no matter what they study, they will need English. But it's much more than English. It's English for a real situation, English to go on studying, English for work, English for travel. And that will make a difference. And if you, on top of that, pay attention to the children's needs, they will change. The I can't learn English, this is too difficult, I don't like it, I'm bored, to, well, I can do something, maybe not all, maybe not in the same way, but I can do it. That's the difference between a positive and a negative classroom. And that is the key. Remember, working together, remember that content is important, but all the rest is much more important. Just content doesn't open any door. If a child can do advanced math, speak 3 languages, or receive top grades, but cannot manage their emotions, cannot practice conflict resolution, cannot handle stress, then none of the other is going to matter, because he will not succeed, he will not get a job, he will not finish university. So we have to teach everything. That is what a good educator does. So my message would be this: let us not remain at the discourse level. Let's not just talk about social and emotional learning. Let's start considering what the people we have in our classrooms, the student persona, what they need, and let's try to bridge the gap between theory and practice. We all have the tools. It's a question of planning a little bit, okay? So I hope you can take some ideas. As usual, it's been a pleasure, Sandra.
So many ideas. I just jotted down what I could, because what Miss Witcher was saying. But perhaps this is, we say a lot, we do little, and we need to start small, but start. With those two, I kind of treasure, you know, I wanted to perhaps end up saying this. Everything is valuable. I think that little steps that we can take are leading the way, and perhaps
and all together, that's the idea.
Yeah, that we can do a little, and each of us. We need to be ready for the new generations, for the new student. The pandemic has introduced, or perhaps it has fastened the change. It has the change.
Or made it a little bit more negative than we expected. A little bit more negative than we expected, and we have to try and make it better.
Thank you so much for your generosity, and thank Macmillan for their generosity as well. We'll just keep in touch as always.
Okay, Sandra, thank you very much, and congratulations on your anniversary. Go on working. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Bye. Thank you. Bye.